samba é o meu tudo na vida.
Ele já foi ao Japão, a Portugal e Miami levado pelo samba. Aos 74 anos, quer compor muito, pintar ainda mais e fazer grandes amigos.
Ela tem uma rosa de ouro nos cabelos.
Nelson Sargento, Casa de Bamba. Gente que tem samba no sangue e no coração. Reapresentação nesta segunda, 00:30.
Você já sabe como ligar pelo DDD Telemar. A cobrar também é muito simples. É só colocar o 9 na frente de tudo. Quer ver?
31, pra ligar a cobrar. 31, põe o 9 na frente, não tem como errar. 31 é o DDD da Telemar. 31, põe o 9, o 0 e o 31. O DDD da Telemar é 31.
O que é que eu vou
Cantando ou compondo, ele é um dos maiores talentos de sua geração.
Sorte, sorte na vida. Eu te amo calado, como quem ouve uma sinfonia. Não adianta nem me abandonar.
Orlando Moraes, 7 Vidas, uma homenagem à música popular brasileira. Já à venda, é som livre.
Globo News, 1000 dias no ar.
Aos 48 anos de idade, o professor Francis Fukuyama atingiu o sonho de todo cientista social. Ele é popular. As teses dele são discutidas da América Latina à Ásia, da Europa aos Estados Unidos. Ele tem trânsito livre com líderes do mundo inteiro e é consultado pelo governo americano em questões de política externa. Nada mal para um homem que é essencialmente otimista sobre a capacidade do ser humano de se organizar socialmente de uma maneira lógica. I said in the introduction that you are essentially an optimist about humans' capacity of organizing itself in society. Was I wrong?
No, that's right. I think that it's not popular to be an optimist, and it's not safe, because if anything goes wrong in society, people can always blame you. But I think that, you know, I made an argument many years ago about the end of history, that liberal democracy and market economies had triumphed, and people didn't take that seriously. But it seems to me that is a basic fact of life now in the modern world. And similarly, I think in the social realm, I think that human beings have great capacities for creating moral order for themselves, and that the kinds of social problems that we've seen in the past generation, you know, are in the process of healing themselves.
I will take one point first, which is the end of history.
Mm-hmm.
When you refer to it, are you talking about the end of the huge upheavals that societies displacing other societies?
Mm-hmm.
Immense amounts of cruelty between human beings and so on and so forth. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, it's history in the sense of, you know, it's history with a capital H. That is to say, the evolution of human societies as they progress from primitive, you know, hunter-gatherer ones to agricultural societies to monarchies, aristocracies, and finally to modern liberal democracy. And in that sense, I think that the fundamental fights that existed over what is the right form of government, what is the proper, you know, way of governing, you know, the economy, have all been settled. And capitalism basically has won, as has liberal democracy. And so, in that sense, I think that fights over, you know, ideology of the sort that occurred, you know, during the Cold War are basically behind us now.
One of the arguments was that what is social democracy?
Mm-hmm.
What can be said to be a creation of a certain race or a certain group or something like this is good for that race or for that group, but not necessarily for the whole of the world. Is social democracy something that all of us, no matter where, accept better than anything else?
Well, in a fundamental sense, I think that's right. That my argument about the victory of liberal democracy is really that it's suited to human nature better than socialism or other forms of government that we've seen in the past. There's obviously a lot of cultural variation in the world, so that very few states in the Islamic world, for example, have become successful liberal democracies. But on the other hand, I think that there's a logic to economic development, that as countries become richer, people's level of education rises, that they begin to demand participation in politics. There's more pluralism, and that's really the basis of modern democracy, and I think that is universal.
I will then try to go through that road. If we think about Africa and the tribal arrangements, if we think about Islam, if we think about Asia, will social democracy in the end be the choice of everyone for a form of government?
Well, let's take Asia. Asia has seen a number of important transitions to democracy. Korea, Taiwan, there was a pro-democracy movement even in the People's Republic of China and Thailand. And what you see is that it really depends on the level of economic development. Once you reach a kind of industrial society in which workers, have to be given at least a high school education, it really changes the political character of the country as a whole, and it makes democracy much more possible. The problem with Africa is that most of sub-Saharan Africa is so poor, incomes less than $1,000 per capita, that they haven't reached really the level of education that I think makes a democracy really sustainable. And I think that, in a way, globalization is one of the things that enforces this, that if you live in a country where you have a guy at the top that's doing all sorts of bad things, wasting money, is corrupt, pouring resources, down a black hole, the international community is really not going to let you get away with that for very long, whether through the IMF or through, people that don't want to invest in your society, through, the exposure of your own population to, to TV, to ideas from the outside. People realize that there are alternative ways of doing things. And so I think that, the freedom of people at the top to impose their own idiosyncratic view of how the society is to be governed is becoming less.
Now, it's a novel concept what you put out, because you say that a global economy will keep in check those who are in power or administering anything, if they are really not doing what they're supposed to do. On the other hand, the popular feeling when you have crises of currency and so on and so forth, that to belong to a global economy is to be on a ride that you can get out if you want to. You see it as a good thing, and sometimes I think people kind of have another.
Oh, sure, and I think, given the crisis that Brazil has been through in the past year, you can see why that happens. But I think that it's a question of short-term pain versus long-term, benefit, because really the global economy imposes a very strict discipline on countries. If you don't get your budget under control, if you don't, rein in social spending and control your debt and this sort of thing, you are going to be punished in the short run. But I think that what happens, or what's tended to happen, is that kind of crisis then creates the political basis for doing the difficult things that are necessary to stabilize an economy, cut inflation, promote, long-term investment and development. And so in the long run, the problem for political leaders is to get you through the short run, because in the short run everybody sees the downsides of globalization. The benefits of it only appear in the long run.
You are espousing the thesis that the benefits are major. The benefits are freedom and less interference and a more
and prosperity
benign society. Is that so?
No, that's right, and I think all of those things tend to go together. As people become more prosperous, they become better educated. As they become better educated, they demand greater freedom. They demand political participation, and so, in a way, both the economic development and the political development go hand in hand.
It sounds utopian.
Well, It's less utopian, I think, than the kinds, the old utopia was a sort of one that was engineered from the top down by a centralized state that, worked through a big bureaucracy and so forth. This, in a sense, is a more private kind of utopia where people are simply allowed to create their own, families, neighborhoods, companies, businesses. And in a sense, it's not, as utopian as the old vision because, you still have social inequality, you have many social problems, crime, all sorts of dysfunctions. But in a way, as I said, I think that it's the best you can do given, the way human beings are.
And the engine of this whole thing will be good old commerce.
Well, that's right. I think that people underestimate the ability of modern capitalism in a way to have a very civilizing influence. It forces people to compete. It makes them work. It gives them rules to live by. It increases their wealth, their opportunities, their freedom in many ways.
Which brings me to the point of your espousing, of your saying that left to their own devices, human beings will reinvent their societies. They will recreate good conditions for living. How come?
Well, I think that this is simply a matter that is coded into, the human brain by nature, by biology. There are many conservatives that think that human beings would not have moral values were it not given to them by religion or some external source. And I think that there's a great deal of research in the life sciences now that indicates that, in fact, you don't need this external source, that people have it within themselves. You can see this just in the behavior of other primates like chimpanzees who create social hierarchies and organize themselves into groups, in effect, have many primitive but simple attributes of a society without, obviously any external sources of, either politics or religion, to give them those rules. And I think that human beings, as they evolve, the reason they are so successful is their ability to be social creatures that can create rules for themselves, that allow themselves to organize. That's why there are 5 billion people, on this planet, why this race has turned out to be as enormously successful in competing with others because of this social ability.
You said literally that human beings need no prophets to show them God, and they need no lawgivers to show them government.
Well, to create, no. What I said was that a basic form of social order, by which I mean, rules concerning private property, rules concerning sex, kinship, the family, rules concerning honesty and reciprocity. These kinds of ordinary forms of morality people would create by themselves, I think, without either a prophet or a lawgiver. What you don't get, by this means is anything beyond a little tribe or band, of 50 or 60 people that manages to, exist off by themselves in some part of the jungle. I think that to move from that level of morality to a modern city or to a modern state, in fact, you do need, in a way, both religion and the state, to get to that point.
And how would you need one and the other?
Well, you have, it seems to me that human beings, when they create moral rules, inevitably create an inside and an outside. We human beings cooperate in order to compete with one another, whether in families or in firms or in nation states. And in some sense, the real paradox of human life is that we are these very social creatures that use our social ability to then, commit violence or aggression against other human, communities. And that's why I think you need politics, because politics, what a modern state is an attempt to get all of these competing groups to, find a framework, a common framework by which they can, work and live together. And I think that modern liberal democracy really is that kind of framework that allows, competition to be channeled into safe areas. The modern capitalist economy, what's in a way brilliant about it is not that it eliminates competition, but that it forces competition into an economic area, so that instead of trying to conquer one another militarily, we compete against each other as firms or nations or one thing or another.
And what about religion? Because there is a distinction between that and faith.
Well, religion, it may sound odd to say this given how many sectarian wars are being fought, today, but I think religion is also very important in expanding what I call the radius of trust, the cultural and moral rules that link people together. And the great world religions, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, and so forth, really were, the primary vehicles 2,000 years ago for expanding, a community out of, small tribes, villages, clans, families, into what Samuel Huntington, the political scientist, has called civilizations. And in that sense, they played an extremely important historical role in creating culture. Religion serves an extremely important, useful purpose for society because it is a language by which a society can express its moral rules, so that even if we don't, many secular people tend not to, believe in the Bible or in, the creation story or whatever, they still need a way to, talk to each other about moral things, about why it's necessary to be honest or to, to love other people or to keep commitments. And religion, I think, is just a very important language that allows it. The further thing is that one of the problems in a modern society is that ritual, disappears. If you go back 100 years or 200 years, every aspect, birth, death, coming to adulthood, becoming middle-aged, was accompanied by a whole series of rituals. And we've stripped away so many of those. And I think people want rituals because they want to be connected to other people. And I think that that's one of the major functions that religion continues to play.
I don't know which road do I follow now, because I'm curious about the societies of trust and lack of, but I'm curious about Aristotle as well. Because you said that if you take away a lot of research, you get to a point that Aristotle knew all about thousands of years ago. It's the philosophy of common sense. So what are the links between him and what we see now?
Well, Aristotle said that human beings are political creatures by nature, and that's a very important observation, because it means that we're not these lonely, isolated individuals that come to society only to fulfill our individual needs. It means that by nature we want to exist in communities, and that we want to create states and operate on a political stage. And in the history of political philosophy, many early modern thinkers actually denied that this was the case, and in fact many modern economists deny that this is the case. That they say we're not social creatures by nature, we're basically selfish individuals. And I think Aristotle understood in a way much better than they did the kind of intensely social nature of human beings.
But if you could establish in your research or in your formation really, what one episode or several that gave you the clear view of this social nature of the human being as opposed to the individualistic nature of human beings, what will it be?
I was struck once by a thing that Mother Teresa said, that in a way she found no place sadder and lonelier than a modern American city compared to the slums of Calcutta, where she had spent her life work. And she said that the reason that was the case was that people, she felt, were simply lonelier, that they had a much higher level of material wealth, but they weren't connected to other people, on the streets and families and so forth. And I think that in a way is an important insight, that material prosperity does not satisfy a kind of human, need for connectedness with other people. And so, that was one thing that made me, realize that she had, I think, made a correct observation, and something that I think many Americans feel, that they are actually lonely.
Though social democracy works and capitalism works well here.
And I think that one of the
contradiction.
No, I think not, because I think that what a modern democracy requires is a cultural basis for success. That is to say, it has to create the moral rules that tie people together, and you can't take those for granted. And in my view, even though there's a kind of progression upwards of political order, social order in a way is much more cyclical and goes up and down in different generations, and so it's a constant struggle to recreate social order.
can you argue that a country with more races and more mixture of races will be more successful at doing so?
Well, it's difficult because I think that culture really presupposes common values and shared values. One of the reasons in the United States, I think that we've had, in a way, a kind of breakdown of social order is that, you know, the country has simply become much more diverse ethnically, religiously, you know, racially, and the like. And with all these communities bumping up against one another and competing against one another, you know, what Americans hold in common gets reduced to just the, you know, obeying the law and you know, basic American belief in basic American institutions. And I think a successful society, in a sense, needs beyond that, you know, a common culture as well.
You said that there are some societies that are ruled by trust and others by lack of it, or not ruled. Could you explain?
No, I think that the question of trust is very important to understanding, in particular, societies like those in Latin America, including Brazil, because I've characterized them in the past as low-trust societies in the following sense, that the most important trust relations tend to be within the family or within, you know, a small circle of friends, and it is relatively difficult to come to trust people to whom one is not related or that are outside, that are strangers in some sense. And I think that it is a problem both politically and economically. Politically, it means that public service always has a kind of lower level of you know, honesty. I mean, you reserve your most important ties, you know, to people that you're close to. But if you become, you know, you're elected to the Senate or you become a politician, you somehow feel entitled to steal on behalf of your family, you know, this sort of thing. And economically, I think it creates a big problem. Firms tend to be family firms. It's hard, you know, throughout Latin America, you know, a large part of the economy tends to be controlled by a network of people who are related to each other in different kinds of family businesses. And the creation of large, modern, impersonal corporations of the sort that exist in North America is difficult in that kind of a cultural setting.
Now, you relate some countries that are societies based on trust, like United States, Germany, Japan, and you classify France, China, Latin American countries as what is the tendency? Is to keep as such or as to change?
Well, that's you know, that's a problem because these cultural patterns tend to be very slow to change. France, you know, I think became a low-trust society right at the end of the Middle Ages, you know, so it was a good 500-600 years ago. And to this day, you know, it's very difficult for two Frenchmen, you know, to work together for a common purpose. I do think, however, that globalization, in a sense, gives a certain amount of hope, you know, that some of these cultural patterns will be overcome, because in a way what counteracts this kind of lack of trust is, among other things, a rule of law, a transparent rule of law, clearly defined, you know, rules, you know, not just legal ones, but in accounting, for example, having to do with the transparency of, you know, the way corporations report their earnings, in terms of social data, you know, a lot of things. And I think one of the things that globalization enforces is it forces all societies to obey, you know, a common set of rules regarding, you know, transparency and this sort of thing.
When you do your research, the data will bring you to a thesis, or your thesis will be confirmed or not by research?
Well, you know, I think it works as a combination of those two. I mean, you have this idea that you think may be true, but you're not sure whether the data supports it, and so you gather the data, and if it does support it, you think you're brilliant because you've now uncovered something, and if it doesn't work, you know, you have to go down a different path, but you never really know ahead of time. And then sometimes you look at the data and you suddenly realize, you know, that you've discovered something, you know, interesting from the data itself. That happened in The Great Disruption, my latest book. I was looking at data on crime, the breakdown of the family, on social trust, these indicators of what I call social capital, it was pretty clear that it was declining in the United States. But then when I broadened the search to other developed countries, it turned out that almost exactly the same pattern occurred, in Britain, Canada, France, Sweden, and all.
The Great Disruption, it says that what we've experienced in the 60s and the 70s was just a cycle, and that society is kind of reasserting itself in a more stable basis. On the other hand, we have the Balkans. How can you understand this kind of logic if you think about a region that has been for at least 600, 700 years plagued by the most inane kind of hatred?
Well, in a way, you're describing apples and oranges, because in the Great Disruption, I'm really talking about, the domestic social rules that govern a society on the inside. And in the Balkans, I think what you really have is a kind of clash of ethnic communities. The real question there is, why are the Balkans so different from Western Europe, which has, in a way, become post-nationalistic, and they've evolved, to
why?
the... Well, there I think it's just an accident of history that the Balkans are struggling to come into the 20th century, not to speak of the 21st century. And in a way, Germany and France and the United Kingdom all went through this nationalist period, which I think is partly the result of the transition into industrialization. They fought two very bloody world wars over it, and now I think that kind of old-fashioned ethnic, nationalism is simply not important as a political factor, but they had to experience all of the trauma, in order to get past that. And the problem with the Balkans was it was always the least developed part of Europe. It was caught in a time warp, so to speak, and communism reinforced that because it arrested the social development of that region. And it's only now that, with the fall of communism, that they're finally, moving into the early 20th century. So they're still a good, 75 years behind the rest of Europe.
We're arriving at the end of the interview. I'd like to ask you just real quickly, the 21st century is around the corner. Is it going to be any good?
Well, it'll be, it's impossible to answer that question. I think that there are a lot of things that will happen in the 21st century that will make that century seem very different. And I don't think it's going to be just a repetition of the old struggles of the 20th century, coming back to haunt us. I mean, for example, the 21st century is going to be the century of biotechnology. In that century, we will for the first time have the ability to control nature, not just through hydroelectric, projects and building skyscrapers, but, through the actual ability to manipulate our own genetic, inheritance. And, who knows what's going to come out as a result of that.
You're optimistic.
Well, I'm guardedly optimistic about that.
Thank you very much, Professor.
All right, thank you.
Samba é o meu tudo na vida.
Ele já foi ao Japão, a Portugal e Miami levado pelo samba. Aos 74 anos, quer compor muito, pintar ainda mais e fazer grandes amigos.
Ela tem uma rosa de ouro nos cabelos.
Nelson Sargento, Casa de Bamba. Gente que tem samba no sangue e no coração. Reapresentação nesta segunda, 00:30.
Alô?
Mãe? Oh, que saudade!
Parabéns, meu filho! Você ligou pelo 31 DDD Telemar e está concorrendo a 30 carros como este e um como este. São 31, meu filho. Quanto mais você liga pelo 31, mais chance você tem de ganhar.
Mãe, você tá bem?
Pelo 31 DDD Telemar, você liga e concorre a 31 carrões.
Liga pelo 31, meu filho.
sucessos internacionais em versões ao vivo. Já à venda, é som livre.
Traga o time da sua paixão cada vez mais para dentro da sua casa. Brasileirão 99 no Premier Pay-Per-View. Mais de 50 jogos ao vivo, exclusivo, inclusive para as praças aonde estão acontecendo os jogos. Aproveite o preço promocional até 24 de julho. Apenas R$ de R$60. E se você já comprou algum campeonato de futebol no Premier Pay-Per-View, consulte a central de atendimento de sua operadora sobre uma oferta especial. Ligue agora mesmo para a central de atendimento NET ou Sky. Brasileirão 99 no Premier Pay-Per-View. O time da sua paixão dentro da sua casa. 50 jogos exclusivos e ao vivo, inclusive para as praças aonde são realizados, por apenas R$ de R$60. Aproveite. Oportunidade como essa é que nem pênalti. Não é coisa que se perca. Ligue agora e reserve o seu lugar em casa no campeonato mais emocionante do mundo.
Globo News. 1000 dias no ar.
Boa noite, eu sou André Trigueiro e você vai ver nesta edição do Conta Corrente. A ONU rebaixa a classificação do Índice de Desenvolvimento Humano do Brasil e desagrada ao governo, que considera esquizofrênico o relatório das Nações Unidas. A demora do presidente Fernando Henrique para definir sobre os incentivos à fábrica da Ford em Camaçari estimula a troca de acusações entre os governadores. Os rumores de uma moratória derrubam a Bolsa de Buenos Aires e arrastam para baixo os principais pregões da América Latina. André Petersen, diretor do Banco Prosper, analisa o sobressalto do mercado brasileiro em relação à Argentina. Ele é o nosso entrevistado ao vivo. O Conta Corrente está começando agora. Efeito tango. A Bolsa de Valores de Buenos Aires despenca nesta segunda-feira. O presidente argentino Carlos Menem atribuiu a queda a fatores externos e disse que a economia do país é muito sólida. Mas o mercado acabou encontrando as causas da baixa do índice Merval dentro das fronteiras do próprio país.
A Bolsa de Buenos Aires caiu 8,67%.
The Album Show. A galeria dos gênios da música. Próxima atração no Superstation.